Dracula, which is a great book. Love it. Highly recommend. It's a stealth feminist novel, I promise you. Mina Harker is my hero. But it's also great if you're not familiar with the novel. Van Helsing definitely has Catholic vampire hunter vibes. There's great scenes of him like warding off vampires with the host, branding them. It's good times. And Lehman and I have this long-running joke in response to the Catholic vampire hunter trope of what an Episcopal vampire hunter would look like. I swear it could be a sitcom. It's like the power of Christ compels you to our adult education forum. I mean, really, we know that you have a hunger for human blood, but we want to enter into dialogue with you about it. Who are we to judge, really? And, it's just a little bit too real sometimes. And I love the Episcopal Church. I love that we are sort of the cuddly Catholics. I love that we want to be non-judgmental and inclusive. It's great. But I sometimes fear that it holds us back from the capacity to actually name and confront the evil that exists in the world. From actually naming and addressing sin, frankly. And that image that Lehman and I joke about with the Episcopal vampire hunter is a distinct contrast from the image that we are given in Mark's gospel today of Jesus the exorcist. Jesus casting out the unclean spirit. And I think it is telling that this is how Mark chooses to introduce us to the ministry of Jesus. This is our first story in the Gospel of Mark of Jesus' public ministry. And each of the Gospels introduces Jesus' ministry in a different way. The Gospel of Matthew begins Jesus' public ministry with the famous Sermon on the Mount. Luke's Gospel presents us with the scene of Jesus going into the synagogue and proclaiming that really profound message of social justice. I have come to declare release to the captives and deliverance of the poor. And this is the story that Mark chooses to introduce us to what Jesus' ministry, his teaching, is. And there's two things of note here. One is that moment of Jesus confronting and casting out the unclean spirit. And the other is the description of Jesus' authority. That there is a new teaching here and one with authority. Now, just to talk about the question of demons and unclean spirits for a moment, we don't have great language in our modern framework for talking about demons. And there are a lot of ways that scholars and commentators try to address the questions of demons and unclean spirits that come up in the Gospels. Is this a pre-modern description of mental illness? Is this a metaphor for some kind of question of sin or evil? But I think to some degree, trying to go too far down that road of understanding exactly how we are meant to unpack the question of quote-unquote demonic activity is a bit of a red herring. And I don't want to go too far down that road. Because I think what Mark is attempting to establish here is much more important for us to talk about, which is the, frankly, apocalyptic nature of Jesus' ministry. In the person of Jesus, we have the unveiling. That is what an apocalypse is. The unveiling of the reality, the presence of God, the presence of the heavenly kingdom coming into confrontation with the powers and principalities of this world, with the reality of sin and, frankly, evil that exists all too often and all too truly in the world around us in various forms. And in this question of authority, of the awe with which the crowds respond to Jesus, what we are seeing is that unveiling, that depiction of the authority, of the power of God to confront the reality of evil. And the question that sticks with me as I've meditated on this text is that description of he spoke with authority unlike the scribes. And I always sort of flag passages like that in the Gospels because we have to be careful of them. It is very easy for us to fall inevitably into those borderline anti-Semitic readings where we become critical of the Jewish faith of Jesus' day. That the gospel writers are particularly critiquing the teachings of the Jewish faith in contrast to the teachings of the Christian church. And we have to remember that Jesus himself obviously was a faithful Jewish man of the first century. And to always be careful and cautious of those readings. And I wonder if Mark is getting at something a little bit more nuanced and frankly interesting and more universally applicable here. And this is going to be one of those moments of reading the Gospels where I am going to invite us into a little bit of supposing, a little bit of imaginative leaps from what is explicitly stated in the text to maybe this is something we could take from it. And I wonder if perhaps what those who are responding with awe to this unique authority manifested in Jesus are responding to is precisely that direct, bold, unwavering confrontation with the power of evil. The willingness to actually name and confront that unclean spirit that presents itself to Jesus. The willingness to demand that it depart, leave that man in question. And I wonder if perhaps something that is being acknowledged here, when we see that unique authority of Jesus being contrasted with the authority of sort of, we might say, the establishment, is that reticence that we often see from those who hold power, authority in our world, to refrain from actually being willing to name and confront evil for what it is. That reality we see so often in political leaders, for example, who give such carefully scripted, focus grouped, manufactured answers to complex questions as to effectively say nothing about the realities that exist in the world that so many of us face. It is maybe something that is behind that caricature that Lehman and I depict of the Episcopal vampire hunter, who is so keen on dialogue, politeness, being conciliatory, not wanting to be too judgy or confrontational, that we hold ourselves back from actually being willing to name and confront the evil that exists in us, in the church, certainly in the world around us. So afraid of being potentially divisive, partisan, confrontational, that we find ourselves incapable of actually embracing the authority, the power to speak to the evil that is all too real in our world. And I get it. There are very, very real reasons for us to be afraid of claiming that dynamic authority. There are all too many very obvious bad actors who use our divided, broken world to build up themselves by being unnecessarily confrontational. There are probably some very obvious examples we could think of that I'm not going to go there, but to speak to the reality within the church specifically, just this past week, there was a conference in the Anglican Church of North America, which some of you will know is the breakaway church from the Episcopal Church, where a speaker was uninvited from the final session of the conference because in his first talk, he just kind of casually said that women and feminism were responsible for all of the problems of the world. And the conference organizers were like, maybe we should just draw some lines here. And of course now he is making the online circuit of building for himself the cachet of having been canceled for speaking difficult truths that people just don't want to hear. None of us want to be that person. And as someone with something of an online platform myself, I know how tempting it is to want to build those engagements, those likes and those follows by calling out things I see as evil and wrong rather than building a platform and a presence and a ministry based on faith, hope, reconciliation. And as we sit with our fear, our reticence perhaps to confront evil boldly and clearly, our fear of falling into being one of those divisive, confrontational voices, it is worth seeing and remembering what the purpose of Jesus' ministry is. Jesus' confrontation with evil, his calling out of the demon, is always for liberation, release, healing, reconciliation, restoring that man purged of the unclean spirit to community. And as we work through the Gospel of Mark over the coming weeks and months, we will note that one of the key themes of Mark is called the Messianic secret. Jesus' full identity is held. It can't actually be spoken and understood until Jesus goes through the ordeal of the cross. And as we consider our calling as followers of Christ, as the church, as the body of Christ in the world, it is important for us to remember that there can be no healing until evil is named. That's true personally. Those who have been through a group like AA will know that there is no healing until you confront the reality of saying, I am an alcoholic. And one of the 12 steps is actually doing the work of atonement and repair. And that is true of the world. When we think about our call as the church to address injustice, oppression, to stand for the marginalized, and to proclaim true peace that is not just passivity, but peace that is rooted in healing and justice, we are called to find the courage, the strength, and the honesty and faith to speak and confront evil for what it is, in the hope of healing and restoration. And in so doing, perhaps be seen as those who speak with authority.